Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Dorr, and I'm the president of the American Enterprise Institute. And I can't tell you how pleased and proud I am to be here to welcome all of you for this conversation today in partnership with the Warsaw Freedom Institute. This is an important discussion with great friends of AEI and great scholars at AEI. And so this is the kind of gathering that AEI exists to do and to hold. And so I'm very, very pleased about it. I want you all to know that I have a personal interest in this topic. My expertise is not foreign and defense policy, but when I was a student at Princeton, one of my biggest academic exercises was a special project on the Solidarity movement and the bringing of freedom and independence to Poland. And I lived those months and experienced them in an American way, cheering all the way. And I think that the success of Poland escaping the grasp of the Soviet Union is one of the greatest achievements of the late 20th century. And I think the rise of Poland and other nations in Eastern Europe into capitalist-free, democratic countries, independent, self-determining, is one of the greatest achievements of the early 21st century. And I think that AEI should be a player in trying to preserve that all the time. So that's why I'm very happy to have all of you here and very proud to be part of this. I also want to just say, just to show you an expression, just to let you know, an expression of that commitment. If you wander around the building a little bit, you'll get a sense that here at AEI we have scholars and we have young researchers and young students often in the building. And so we've made a commitment to inspire them with paintings and pictures and depictions of heroes of the United States mostly. So we have a Grant, and we have a Lincoln, and we have a couple Washingtons, and we have a Senator Robert Kennedy, and we have a Ronald Reagan. We have a lot of great leaders all through the building. And we also have in our dining room, in a very prominent place, a lovely photograph that I selected of John Paul II and Lech Walesa and his wife, Danuta. And if you go and look at that, and you look at that picture, and you look at the faces, Lech Walesa is, of course, Lech Walesa, and His Holiness is His Holiness. But Danuta is the interesting, because her face is full of faith and hope and commitment to free Poland, a great Poland. And I'm just so pleased that I have that for all of our students and scholars to see every day at lunch or breakfast. The last thing I want to say in introductory remarks is just that you will note in your agenda for today 3 great AEI scholars. Kori Schake, who runs the Foreign and Defense Policy team for us and is the foremost scholar on civil-military relations in the United States. She has many other distinguishing qualities, but that's one you can hang your hat on. And she's also a great leader of our team. Heather Conley, who comes to us from the German Marshall Fund and is now with us, is an absolutely outstanding participant in our scholarship here, and we're very proud to have her. And then Dalibor Roak, who I want to say a special word about, because Dalibor and I have known each other now almost 10 years in your time here, and I've watched him as a scholar in a completely different field, and he brings to his scholarship a great passion and a great commitment and a great collegiality. And it's just been such an honor to work with you, Dalibor, and to watch you. And I've admired you. You get a kind of chuckle when I compliment you on your News Corp column in the New York Post. But that may not be as academic as you like, but it's terrific for me. I like it. And Dalibor, it's just been a great honor to be with you. And I want all of you to know that at AEI, we have wonderful scholars, and it's exemplified by Dalibor Roak's work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Igor for some opening remarks. Great to partner. Great to be here.
Thank you, Robert, so much. Thank you for having us here. I'm Igor Janka. I'm a president of Warsaw Freedom Institute, and we are newcomers in Washington. This is our first on-site event, so I'm really grateful that we could do it with American Enterprise Institute. Let me say a few words about us. Back in Poland, I run a Freedom Institute, Instytut Wolności, and freedom is a crucial word for us because it was something what we were fighting for, and now we are doing our best to maintain it and to preserve it. And what we do in Poland mostly is our main project is a leadership school, because we believe that we are in a historic moment and we can we achieved a lot as Poland. We have enormous economic success, but I think we can go much higher. But we knew we need a new mindset of our leadership, and that's why we run the leadership program. We have already more than 1,000 alumni, excellent leaders, age 30 plus, more or less. Really, I recommend you all of them. They are great entrepreneurs, great managers, experts from different branches. And here we just launched the Warsaw Freedom Institute, which is we are completely independent. What is very important, we are non-partisan, so we are happy that we can have here Polish guests, Polish politicians from both main parties, ruling and opposition. And so what we bring? I believe we bring new vision and new energy. New energy because Poland is fastest growing Europe's economy. We are no longer Europe students. We are no longer security recipients, but we are becoming security providers. We are building or I believe maybe the strongest military in Europe. And we believe that together with our partners from Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, Sweden, Norway and Denmark, we can build a real shield for Europe. And together, but we should do it together with you, with Americans, with United States. And we bring something more. We bring our expertise, because I believe we have the biggest number of Russia experts. Roughly, I counted 37 million experts. Because every Pole really understands Russia very well, and I think every Pole could advise to American administration what Putin really is about, what he thinks, what is his logic. So we want to share this knowledge with you. We want also to encourage our leaders, political leaders from both sides, but also political leaders from the countries I mentioned, and that we should cooperate much more together. I think it should be new direction for Polish foreign policy, so we should go north. And I think this group of countries could be a very interesting partner for United States, and this is something what we are going to discuss today. So again, thank you so much for having us here, and especially I want to thank you to Dalibor, because we met, and it's thanks to you for your thank you for your commitment. Thank you for all of you that you are here. And I would like to introduce Paweł Kowal, who is the Chief of Foreign Committee in Polish Parliament and member of the ruling coalition. Paweł, please take the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, my name is Paweł Kowal. I am chair of Foreign Affairs Committee and special plenipotentiary of Polish Prime Minister to recovery of Ukraine. I'm also a professor in the Polish Academy of Science. My latest book is a biography of Polish famous sculptor Magdalena Abakanowicz. But today we will discuss about strategy, about European and, first of all, Polish strategy in the difficult time. We come here to Washington, ladies and gentlemen, with members of parliament, as you like, in a capacity of bipartisan delegation practically every few months. Yesterday we started our meetings on the Hill. Every meeting on Capitol Hill begins with congratulations. Igor said Poland is fastest growing European economy. And distinguished members of Congress also started from the congratulations. Poland has achieved economic success. Success, that's a crucial word. Poland is like a lighthouse, like a beacon for another Central European countries. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, at the current stage, the only weak point in Poland's development is weak demographic growth. That's a paradox. Simultaneously, Concurrently, our message to our allies, our message to our counterpartners in the US, but not only, it's very short. Poland is a frontline state. Poland is currently one of the primary targets of Russian hostile activity below the threshold of war. Sabotage, arsones, hybrid pressure on the border, cyber attacks, and influence operations. That's today everyday life of my country in Central Europe. The scale of Russian threats is the greatest since the end of the Cold War. These actions undermine the stability of the entire region and really testing everyday cohesion of NATO and European Union. Most importantly, Russia's policy against Poland threatens the entire legacy of generations of Poles since 1989. What is the essence of Russian policy in the Central Europe, but not only? Russia's geopolitical ambitions and the Black Sea dimension. Russia seeks dominance. Russia wants to change border. That's a question of very basic revisionism. Russia seeks dominance in the Black Sea region and aims to increase its leverage over strategic maritime choke points. Russia's growing importance in the Black Sea, the Balkans, and Central Europe poses a major strategic challenge not only to Poland, but to the EU and Turkey as well. This is a systemic problem for all of Europe. It's a matter of an axis of hostile states: Russia, China, Iran, and Korea. That's a right picture of the current situation of our countries. Let's, for the moment, concentrate around Poland, on my country. The great paradox of the current situation. One hand, congratulations, admiration, compliments, gratitude, the work of generations, and ominous message: we could lose this because Russian policy. How we can avoid of this scenario? What is the dream, the Polish dream in the 21st century? 25 years more of development, of growing. How can we achieve it? That's the fundamental question for us. Poland's response and strategic credibility. Of course, Poland is, in my opinion, well prepared. If we compare, for example, the situation with the crisis between the Second World War. This includes the scale of military spending. Do not forget, 4.7% of GDP for defense, and the size and strength of its armed forces. Additionally, we will implement European program for defense spending SAFE, means extra 44 billion euros to improve our national defense capabilities and invest in this sector in Poland, especially in the central Poland, in historical centralny okręg przemysłowy, centralny okręg przemysłowy. The SAFE program is financed through the EU loan and serves as an indirect guarantee the spending in the US will not reduce. The SAFE program constitutes a response to appeals made by the US president, in fact. That's one of stick points of our policy, to ask our European partners to improve their possibilities to produce, to improve the industry and the defense production. Our strategy has been simple and consistent. Increase spending, defense spending, cut energy ties with Russia. It was a big success of all Polish governments, our government and predecessors the last years. And finally, build a strong and modern military. There's only one task, is in one word: stop Russia. In a strategic sense, this involves two or, in fact, three parallel, concurrent lines of action. First, strengthening Europe's military capabilities. A telling quote from the great Polish poet: to bite the European bison in the ass. Second, developing regional cooperation with the Baltic Sea region. Take the example of Sweden, for example. We understand the threats posed by Russia. We have the same strategic problems with Russian revisionism policy. And finally, today we have the joint military programs and intensive economic and political relations. Third line of our answer for the current strategic situation: cooperation with the United States. Let's concentrate for a moment on the role of the United States in Poland. That's a unique relations, not only because security, but from my point of view, especially because our common history, because about 10 million people with Polish roots in America, because historical ties, because Kościuszko, etc., etc. And finally, today, in every geopolitical scenario, the American presence in Poland over the coming years, it's fundamental, is vital for Polish security. A strong and permanent American military presence in Poland remains essential at this stage. It serves three crucial purposes. It sends a clear deterrent signal towards Russia. Second, it legitimizes and stabilizes policy towards Ukraine. And it strengthens the internal legitimacy of Poland's security policy, including arms expenditure covered by budget. Few words about possible post-war security architecture. It is impossible to separate Ukraine's future security arrangements from the broader security situation in Central Europe. That's a first step, ladies and gentlemen, to solution of the strategic situation in Central Europe. There is no way to improve strategic position of Poland and our partners without stopping of the Russian hostilities against Ukraine. A ceasefire without credible guarantees could increase Russian hybrid destabilization. That's also question of the potential conditions of ceasefire and its influence into Polish national security. There is fundamental for Polish security to fully accept the rules of international law. If anybody wants to violate legally accepted borders, if any politicians are ready to accept forcible changing borders in the Central Europe, that's clear that's the first step to the next bigger war. Security guarantees for Ukraine should be understood as a stage of its path toward EU and NATO integration. That's a position of our national security point of view. Politically, ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine is a part of the West. Ukraine is already deeply integrated with NATO structures through training, equipment, and command reforms implemented after 2014. The Ukrainian army has become a model for the reorganization of Western armed forces, especially in the light of drones revolution. This experience can provide a strategic advantage to the West in the long term. I would like to underline that very specific element, the drone rush and military transformation. If we want to understand the processes, it's impossible without understanding of the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. The perfect tool to change situation in Ukraine will be, for sure, reconstruction. Maybe the better word is recovery. Recovery as a three parallel processes: integration, modernization, and rebuilding. After the war, governance challenges and various pathologies may increase. No illusion. May increase rather than decrease. The best remedy for these challenges is the EU accession process, which provides standards, monitoring, conditionality, and fundamental institutional reforms. Without EU integrations and credible security guarantees, Western investment, the legal conditions for that investments in Ukraine will remain limited. Without investment and structural reform, economic transformation, in Ukraine will not be effective. I can't believe that it's possible to transform post-war Ukraine. That's, ladies and gentlemen, exercise for strategic imagination. That's impossible without full participation of Ukraine in international legal structures, especially in EU. Strategic conclusions. How to save our success. How to prolong our development for the next 25 years. We discussed that issue yesterday evening with Professor Mikta. How to deal with that complicated situation. Everyday Russian threat, imperialism, revisionism, and Polish fantastic growth. Security in Ukraine, stability in Central Europe, strengthen the transatlantic relationship, and of course, strong defense, re-energizing Europe. Do not forget that bisons us, deep transatlantic ties, NATO enlargement, and finally, EU integration. Especially with that special role of regional integration around the Baltic Sea. Thank you so much.
Chairman Kowal, thank you so much. I think given the time constraints and the fact that our first panel should be starting at 9:40, I think we are just going to proceed straight to the panel rather than have this one-on-one conversation that we originally planned with you. I hope that's okay with you, but I think your message was loud and clear and everybody took note of it. So I would like to invite Igor and the panelists for the first panel to make their way slowly to the stage. Chairman Kowal, thank you so much.
For Igor? No. Igor will invite for the first panel. Igor will organize the first panel.
I think we need some more chairs.
We need more chairs, I think.
Yeah.
Could you help?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Paweł, for your excellent speech and excellent introduction. And now I would like to invite Radosław Fogiel, the member of Polish Parliament and former chief of Foreign Committee in the previous Parliament, representative of opposition. As you know, as I told you, we are bipartisan, so I'm happy that you have both sides. Ian Brzeziński, Senior Fellow, Atlantic Council, and Andrew Michta, a professor of University of Florida and member of board of Warsaw Freedom Institute, the founding father of Instytut Wolności, Freedom Institute, and our speaker. Thank you so much. So our goal is to explore the potential of the North Baltic Polish region, the Northeastern NATO flank, including shared challenges and interests, as well as its potential role and as a crucial partner for United States. So, Andrew, may I start with you?
Okay.
You have argued several times that the geopolitical center of gravity in Europe is shifting eastward. From a strategic perspective, how important is the Nordic Baltic Polish region becoming for NATO?
It's absolutely critical. First of all, let me thank our hosts, AEI, for having us here. Dalibor, muchas gracias. And Igor, thank you for bringing this wonderful group here. Two things. I mean, first of all, if you look at NATO enlargement process, the eastern flank is now anchored with Finland in the alliance, in the north, Sweden in the alliance, around the Baltic Nordic kind of corridor. And the key hub country in this is Poland. Poland is what the Bon Republic used to be during the Cold War. It's got the largest population base. It's growing exponentially. It is now in the process of building first-rate military, especially when it comes to land forces. It's now investing in air and missile defense. And there are synergies in terms of both the defense industrial base of Sweden, Finland, Poland, the Baltic states. I think Denmark and Norway are also part of that. And also the exposure of NATO where deterrence has to work. Remember that Finland is an additional 830 miles of frontier that we've added when the alliance enlarged to the east. The reason we have legacy military installations in Germany is because that was the point of contact during the Cold War. That point of contact is now in Poland, in the Baltic states, and in the Nordic Baltic corridor. And finally, you know, like in any alliance, and I'm speaking of the Northeast corridor, but within the structures of NATO, alliances are built predominantly on shared interests and shared threats, and the countries on the eastern flank have both. They also share values, of course. They're democratic states. But that sense of very existential threat that Chairman Kowal was speaking about, that Russia poses to NATO and to Europe, to our way of life, to our freedom, that is something felt very strongly in those countries. I was recently in Finland and in Lithuania, and it comes across in every conversation I have with government officials or people in the industry. So I think this is now the center of gravity of the alliance, and we should invest accordingly to shore up that center.
Thank you. Radek, for many years, Poland looked primarily south and west. So we created the Visegrad Group, which was very vital, but now it's have some problems. And we created Weimar Triangle, which was more artificial than real, I think. And we think that now is a time that Poland should look north towards the Baltic and Nordic countries and treat the northeastern flank as a primary strategic direction in Europe for Poland. Do you agree with that, or you don't?
Long story short, I do, but let me start by thanking our hosts for having us and also by apologizing. I will have to leave a bit earlier because we have another series of meetings on the Hill. But answering your question, that's true, of course. The Visegrad Group is still a vital element of Polish partnership. So is the Weimar Triangle that has its perks sometimes. But I do agree that right now, especially when it comes to security, especially when it comes to NATO framework, we should be more aligned to like-minded countries, and this like-mindedness is often anchored in a shared threat. that we share with Romania, with our Baltic neighborhood, with Nordic countries, and it's actually not new. It was a vital part of the foreign policy that was led by late President Lech Kaczynski. He always has seen Poland as a regional leader for our part of Europe, and now, since Poland is becoming the most important country on the eastern flank, we are facing immense Russian threat again after the years of appeasing Russia. Now we can see clearly that this does not work. We should build closer ties with countries that understand that threat, which also includes, in my opinion, Great Britain. It's a bit different geographical position, but Great Britain is one of the countries that was affected by Russia. Let's remember Skripal and other incidents. And Great Britain was one of the first Western countries to understand our concerns and understand how dangerous Putin's Russia is. So definitely, when it comes to the European theater and deterrence towards Russia, Poland should be working with our closest neighborhood, with benign countries, and with our Nordic partners.
Thank you. Ian, what should be the key priorities in strengthening security and political cooperation between Poland and Nordic and Baltic states?
Well, let me also thank you, Igor, and Dalibor for convening us, and it's great to see so many old friends and to make some new ones here. Let me just step back and let me share with you why I think this relationship between Poland and the Scandinavians or Nordics is so exciting and so important. I mean, look, the fact is we are in very precarious and ominous times. I was struck by the fact to read this morning that Freedom House has a report out that indicates that today only 21% of the world's population lives under freedom, under free conditions, down from 48% in 2005. Pavel very articulately explained the threat posed by Russia, its aggression. You add to that China's increasing assertiveness, its collusion with Russia. You see raging war in the Middle East. But you know what scares me the most? What scares me the most is today's increasingly urgent crisis in transatlantic unity and self-confidence. And that is precluding the transatlantic community from exercising its immense military, economic, and ideological power to deal with those challenges. And our advantages are overwhelming. NATO's militaries, despite all their flaws, are unmatched. NATO alone, not including the other EU states, has some $55 to $60 trillion in GDP, vice Russia's $2 trillion. We have global networks, and of course we have the ideological advantage of being true representatives of freedom and democracy, principles that people are yearning for around the world. Yet we're unable to exercise that power. And so building on Andrew's and Radek's points, when you look at Poland and you look at the Scandinavian countries, you see a community of common values, a clear recognition of the threat, a serious commitment to defense. And for me, I think that's the core we have to turn to help kind of spark a revitalization of the transatlantic alliance, a revitalization of its willingness and commitment to exercise its power on behalf of its interests and principles. So in short, if I had to think of this community of like-minded nations, spark of life of unity and commitment in the alliance, I think my priorities would be as follows. I'm not sure what quite the priority list would be, but one is working together in the Baltic Sea, securing the Baltic, because it's still a contested space. 2, Ukraine. And I think Poland actually can do more prominently in Ukraine. It should be part of the security force that goes into it. That sends a powerful message to the Ukrainians, to the Russians, to other Europeans, but also here. I think this community can also be a source of balanced or driver of balanced response to some of the difficulties the United States is bringing to the transatlantic security relationship, to help ensure that Europe doesn't overreact to some of Trump's actions. And then, fourth priority, of course, is going to have to be the Arctic, because if Poland wants the Nordics to work with it in the Baltic Sea and its neck of the woods, Poland's going to have to think a little bit more about the Arctic. It's only fair. But those are the priorities I'd put onto that, this special community of democracies within the alliance.
Thank you, thank you. Indeed, Baltic, we say we have a hybrid war, but this is a mild expression. We have a war already. Every day something happens in the Baltic. Radek, since you're going to left, so I mentioned to you, a challenge is turning geography into political effectiveness and political effective coordination. What institutions and format could strengthen cooperation between our countries, between Poland, the Baltics, and Nordics? Shall we create a new formats, political formats?
Well, the question in general is how should NATO be framing its activities? As you said, we are already in a war, basically, because if we start adding adjectives to it, we will not see clearly the situation that we are in. The fact that we are facing drone incursions every other week. These drones not only violate the NATO's airspace, but from time to time that they paralyze air traffic in different NATO countries. The fact that we have no idea where and when another underwater cable may be damaged. The fact that we are facing arsons, acts of sabotage against railways, for instance. This means we are already under attack, and NATO should be able to see it. The question is, as an alliance, are we going, for instance, during the next NATO summit in Ankara, are we going to review our rules of engagement? Are we going to review how we react against those kind of threats? But speaking of institutional response, I think I already mentioned the Bucharest 9, and I guess this is the format that we should be building on, because Bucharest 9 was formed a few years ago as a closer network of Eastern flank countries within NATO. And right now, with Finland and Sweden becoming members, we should be probably looking at Bucharest 11, or even if we go all the way in and are generous about the Baltic Sea, maybe we should even invite Norway. Then we have the Bucharest dozen, NATO dirty dozen, which can be quite effective. So I think we will need different internal NATO formats to deal with different sorts of threats. It's an ongoing conversation between South European NATO members. We expect them to understand the threats against the eastern flank. They expect us to understand what they are facing when it comes to migration from Africa, for instance. So I believe that while working together as the alliance, and the transatlantic crisis that Ian mentioned has to be tackled very soon if we want to succeed, we will also need smaller formats that are dedicated to certain areas. And as I said, Bucharest 9, hopefully Bucharest dozen will be one of them.
Igor,
Ian, yeah,
could I
sure.
add to that? Look, There are a lot of institutional formats out there. I mean, Poland could be brought into the JEF. It could be brought into NORDEFCO. But I think the real key thing is action. And I think this relationship between Poland and the Nordics has already a foundation stone, and that's the Swedish-Polish relationship. And it's ensconced in a strategic partnership they signed about 2 years ago. And since then, Poland is now purchasing Swedish submarines, Swedish airborne radar systems from Saab. The Swedes are buying more Polish equipment, including air defense missiles. Their relationship is becoming operational. Sweden has sent Gripens to patrol Polish skies. Poland sent an airborne element to land on Gotland last September in a SNAP exercise. That's real action. This is the beginning of a new security pillar, North-South, cross-Baltic security pillar. That's action, that resonates, and I hope that kind of relationship will spread between Poland and the other Nordic states.
Andrew?
I'd like to comment on a couple of things that Ian raised that are very, very important for this conversation. I always hear comparisons of the combined GDP of the Western nations as opposed to Russia. I mean, the Russian Federation is a pale shadow of what the Soviet Union was, both in terms of its GDP and its population base and its reach. The Soviet Union was sitting in the middle of Germany, had 54 non-Soviet Warsaw Pact divisions at a snap of its finger. It was a very different conversation, and that actually complicates developing shared threat perceptions across the alliance, because it's now really driven by where you are on the map, the kind of regionalization of the security optics. But I want to say one thing. It is absolutely true that the West has this latent capacity that far outstrips what the Russians get put into the field. But as I once said to my colleagues in Germany, the Ukrainians can't shoot Euros. They need shells, they need missiles. That latent capacity has to translate into real exercised military capability and real defense base. And what the Northeast Corridor is promising is something that every US administration over the last 30 years has increasingly sought, which is to reduce the cost of maintaining this transatlantic bond and securing the Atlantic and Europe. And now hemispheric defense is really part of that conversation as well. And it ties into the Nordic-Baltic conversation. And countries that share these threat perceptions have synergies that Ian talks about, defense industrial, military cooperation. They actually can do this. I'll give you an example. 2023, I believe it was at Ramstein in March, where the Scandinavians signed an agreement to operate their F-34s, not F-34, sorry, their fourth generation aircraft under SACEUR's umbrella as almost one Air Force. That increases capability. We need to have this region come up with specific proposals, bring them to Washington, ask for enablers from our side, negotiate the process through which that synergy can develop. That is something very specific that we need. I think building political institutions is not going to address it. And I emphasize this has to happen within the NATO structures. This is not about building alternative arrangements. And it also means negotiating with other allies. I would just submit to you, Germany is a Baltic state as well. There's no reason why the Germans should not participate in this conversation. But it cannot be an alternative to the transatlantic security umbrella, because quite frankly, for the next decade, Europe will not be in a position to field the forces that it needs. And we can go through how devastated the individual armed forces in Europe have become outside of the flank. Finns have the largest conventional artillery in Europe. Finns have practiced and trained for territorial defense for decades. Now they have to learn how to operate in NATO. Poland is building an armor force second to none. Finns and Poles will have the F-35s once the orders are fulfilled. All of this is building a package that I think the Pentagon can work with on this alliance basis and create a deterrent that will not allow the Russians to twitch. And then, of course, the task will be to make sure that other countries don't feel somehow excluded from this, that we do not segment the alliance, into first tier, second tier, and third tier. But I would return us to the conversation about NATO, because as Ian said, the relationship is fracturing, and it's very disturbing what we see.
Yeah, the most important is action and practice, as Jan said. So let's try to be more precise. How should the region develop? How should the region develop military cooperation and defense in the northeastern flank? What shall we do now? What kind of? How shall we intensify the cooperation, the military and defense cooperation?
Who is it to? To me?
To you and
Well,
to all of you.
I've already mentioned defense industrial cooperation, joint exercises, allowing, working on developing air and missile defense systems, which are horribly neglected. Without the U.S., capabilities and high-end enablers, Europe is pretty much unable to operate effectively. So not only developing, your own capability, but working closely with the United States to fill those gaps. Also, I think sharing technology is something absolutely critical to strengthen the defense industries of different countries. All of that should be developed into specific packages, specific proposals. And most of all, I think Poland has a huge role to play. And that was my impression when I was in the Baltic, when I was in Scandinavia, Sweden and Poland and Finland, that there's this expectation that Warsaw take the lead in kind of cohering the whole structure into something that will become a regional security bloc within the NATO alliance.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I'll just add one sentence to that, as I need to run, unfortunately. Professor Michta is absolutely right. Nothing can be achieved without US. And I would say, when it comes to the Eastern Flank cooperation, division of labor. So we have our specializations as countries. We should bring them together. We should exercise together. We should identify what are the crucial needs that cannot be fulfilled by the Eastern Flank countries, where we need US, whether it's specific enablers or intelligence from the US. And we should be able to build a fully working security, defense, and deterrence structure based on our own capabilities, with the help and with the presence of the American partners. That's crucial.
Could I add just one more
Sure,
thing to this? It's
sure.
very important. If you come from the region and from NATO Europe to Washington with a plan to actually lower the cost and the strain on the joint force and the US military in general, that will get a very good hearing in Washington, regardless of the administration. If you look at how much the US is spending on defense, I would submit to you we're spending about half of what we did during the Cold War. Our joint force is too small. We have a full-blown, full-scale war in Europe. We now have full-scale war in the Middle East. That's the second theater. We're pulling assets out of South Korea, which means this is encouraging the Norcos to look at this as maybe a target of opportunity, at least to create a crisis. And now we have the Indo-Pacific. We're stretching that front. If we want to secure Europe, the conventional deterrence and defense should be provided in bulk by the Europeans. And I think that's why initiatives like this are so important. Ian?
I guess, a big message I'd emphasize is, as we look forward to building the future for us, we shouldn't ignore what we can do now and need to do now with the forces we have on hand. And we have more than enough forces necessary to act decisively in the European theater. So for the group, the Polish Nordic group, and I love Radek Sikorski's description of Poland as southern Scandinavia, which reflects his commitment to this relationship. On the security side, I would add to the list that my colleagues put out the following. One, developing a truly common operating picture of the Baltic Sea, air, surface, and subsurface. Sweden and Poland can be a driver of that. I think more SNAP exercises done within NATO, but also bilaterally, trilaterally, and such are in order, using the forces we have on hand. And then I would urge this coalition to press the alliance to do larger scale exercises in Central and Eastern Europe. NATO has done large scale exercises, but they've been off the far west coast of Norway and off of Portugal, not in Central and Eastern Europe, where those large scale exercises need to happen. this ought to be a focus of this coalition.
Thank you. How much time do we still have, Dalibor, do you know? Another half an hour. Oh, that's fine.
One last comment, and then I'll turn it over to
sure,
you.
no.
So I've been thinking as Ian was speaking about those practical exercises. We have an alliance of 32 members, okay? In terms of their digital capabilities, they're somewhere between the fax machine and the highest end systems. Coordinating that alliance, making it truly interoperable in the digital space is something that should be top priorities. We need a NATO battle management system that allows us to tie Montenegro together with the more sophisticated, using Montenegro just as an example, not to show disrespect. And I think that is also something which these countries in the Northeast can actually work jointly on and provide some new solutions to how to manage data in the 4 gigahertz spectrum, for example, that NATO uses for communications. They're all very concrete projects that we should be putting into play.
If there's anybody who would like to give a comment or questions, please raise your hand. We will turn to you. And I want to ask Ian, is there a realistic path towards a coherent Nordic, Baltic, Polish strategic framework within NATO, or rather it should be bilateral and cooperation?
I think it ought to be informal. I'm not comfortable with formal coalitions within NATO. Remember, these are democracies, so unity will ebb and flow as such. But within NATO, you can have coalitions that drive initiatives forward. And sometimes they drive them within the alliance, and sometimes they drive it out from outside the alliance to bring eventually alliance on board. So this informal coalition, unified by the common security perspective, the common commitment to defense, to their geographic locations, that is an important coalition. Also, it's a coalition that I would add, has a certain amount of influence, as seen as a reasonable voice. I mean, Poland has been proven right on Russia after it was scoffed for decades, literally. The Scandinavians have tended to be pretty skeptical about Russia, but more quiet about it. They're seen as realists now within the transatlantic community. This is also a community that actually has more voice than I think it recognizes here in Washington. Certainly more than I would say the French, in all respect, the Germans, and even the UK. Working together within NATO towards those ends, I think, would be very, very useful and is urgently needed today.
Shall we act together also? I mean, the countries from the region also here in Washington. What should be our offer to Washington, especially to this administration?
When I mentioned very specific proposals, I will also add that there is a huge area that should be tapped. That's in the area of economic cooperation, infrastructure building. Most of the infrastructure in that region is post-imperial. It runs east-west because that's how the flows were going, right? We need to build north-south connectivity. I'm a great fan of the project that Poland has undertaken to build the central communication hub airport, because that will bring fuel pipelines and railroad connectivity to be able to move equipment and troops on this north-south axis. This is something that can be done just, government to government investing, or even working within the EU structures to get that investment in place. But that should be a priority. So this is not just political cooperation, military cooperation, it's also economic cooperation. Whether it's formal or informal, the important thing is that the cat catches mice. There was a wise guy who said it once, and his country grew considerably since then. So I would be very practically oriented in how this is done, rather than big kind of statements and signing of agreements. Work at the middle level, work at the defense ministers level, foreign ministers, ministers of the economy level, to come up with ways to strengthen the flank and to increase the ability to deter Russia.
Do you believe that we should, that this region should take a lead in the transatlantic dialogue, that Stubb, Nawrocki, they should come to Donald Trump with concrete offer and say, yes, we are here. We are the ones who spend money. We are the ones who build the shield here. Let's do something together in a language which is understandable now in the White House.
Well, they are in some ways already the new voices of influence in Washington. I mean, the voice that comes from Germany and from France, to a certain degree the UK, is sort of out of tradition, familiarity, certain geoeconomic, geopolitical mass that they bring. But those are countries whose voices don't resonate now as resolutely, as influentially as the president of Finland, and for that matter, from the voice of Poland on both sides of the party. I mean, it's kind of unusual you have these two loggerheads bashing each other in Warsaw, but both of them carry a certain amount of weight here and respect in Washington, and it should be leveraged.
Thank you. Please, Hiro.
Hi, Tomasz Raczkowski, American University. I want to share a comment and maybe a question. What I'm missing from this panel is a representative of the Scandinavian. We'd love to hear, and maybe this is a question.
It will be in the second panel.
Oh, we will have
We're going to have the second
But
panel.
maybe we can anticipate some of the issues already. So
Okay.
Professor Michte knows this reality, but we need to understand what are their strategic interests. How far would they be willing to go? For example, Finland is well prepared, but they have no big offensive capability other than locally. So would Finland come to Poland's aid in case of an invasion? Or would this just limit itself to some maneuvers, perhaps to sharing technology and things like that? The second comment has to do with Turkey. I saw very interesting I watched German news programs, very interesting perspective on what we're talking about from there. And it was about a Turkish-German or Turkish NATO group in the Baltic. Maybe you've observed it. It was quite interesting to hear the German defense minister comment. He said, what the Turks did when we invited them to some Baltic exercises, they sent 4 large ships and more than 1,000 Marines who were excellent in presenting themselves very, very well. And the implication was, you know what? Turkey is going to replace the United States as the European NATO hub. But should we include Turkey in some of these, let's say, coalitions of the willing? Would they be part of that Nordic group? How should we call it? Can this be developed into something more than an informal framework and ad hoc actions? In other words, could we have treaty obligations by some of these countries, say, to come to the aid of the Eastern flank?
So Turkey as a very southern part of Scandinavia.
Look, sir, I mean, Finland to me is truly a remarkable country in many ways when it comes to security and defense. I've known Alex Stubb for several years before he became president, and he is one of the cooler heads in the alliance. He just wants to work the problem. I mean, it happens to me very often when I come to Europe, 5 minutes into the conversation, everything devolves into some sort of complaint about the US, President Trump and whatnot. People like Stubb basically work the problem because he knows that the relationship is not with this or that president, this or that political party, but the vital national security relationship that Finland, Poland, and other countries have with the US. So that's the first point. The second point is Finland is 5.6 million, roughly. It's a country that can raise an army of 280,000 at the drop of a hat. Total mobilization of civil defense and military up to 800,000 in a national emergency. Everybody serves from 18 to 60. And as their specialization, professionally changes, they adapt them for military purposes. I was given a briefing in the brigade around Helsinki, and I was just remarkable to see that. Social cohesion, trust in government. So Finns have lessons that can apply across the region, not only in terms of how can we deploy, but also how do we actually organize ourselves into this porcupine that will not be easily overrun by the Russians. If you look at how they plan their defense, if you look at the eastern periphery in particular, the Finns have to learn how to be a member of NATO in the sense that, this is not just territorial defense is what they were used to. And this is a question for the politicians to determine. Are you going to be able to send the draftees? Will the parliament have to authorize this in every case? But this should be negotiated, and I emphasize, I'm very skeptical about your idea that NATO, can kind of replace the United States with Turkey. I think the geopolitics is very different. I think the nature of the Turkish state and its interests in particular. I think it would be very hard to make an argument that Turkey will play a key role in the high north and in the Arctic. I mean, that'd be a stretch. So I wouldn't go there. But I do think that we should always keep in mind one thing, and there's a tendency right now to look for alternatives to NATO. I believe NATO is the best deal when it comes to national security and defense that the Europeans will ever have, and that the United States nuclear umbrella, high-end enablers, our ability to project power, cannot be replaced, even if the Europeans commit 10% of their GDP to defense for the next decade. It will take that long, and you will never have the same level of security and defense. Ian?
Yeah. I guess I totally agree with what Andrew said about the importance of NATO and don't throw in the towel in the alliance. And for that matter, don't throw in the towel in the United States. I think we're just going through a very difficult time under current leadership when it comes down to America's commitment to Europe. You look at the polls, you look at congressional attitudes, it could be a very different, I think it will be a very different picture in a couple of years. I would caution about being overly bullish about this Polish Nordic pillar. I want to start with a word of caution and then be optimistic about it. Yes, Finland can mobilize a huge force, but its active duty force is around 30,000.
That's right.
And until it becomes that becomes a significantly larger operational force, you have Finland with 31,000, Sweden with 25,000, Norway with about 25,000, Poland with 234,000 active duty. So there is a mass issue here that's a little bit constraining in terms of what operationally that this community can do beyond its borders, so to speak. But with that said, these are influential states. They're serious about defense. They take action. They have a shared threat perception. And as I emphasized, they have influence. So what excites me about this coalition is its ability to catalyze European action, transatlantic action, through its own action in its own neighborhood, and eventually, beyond.
And Turkey? What do?
Andrew put it well. Turkey won't replace the United States. I mean, the fact is, if the United States, for some reason, were to leave NATO, it is the end of NATO.
That's right.
And it is the end of European stability. My big fear about America turning away from Europe as maybe a second-generation Polish American is that you're going to leave Europe vulnerable to its own human weaknesses. And we've seen that the consequences of that through history, including the last century and two world wars. And the United States has been a great unifying, with all our imperfections and all our foibles and all our mistakes. It's been fundamentally a stabilizing and unifying force within Europe. It unleashes Europe's potential to protect itself. It unleashes the transatlantic community's capacity to project freedom and our values, security and stability, and ultimately prosperity beyond the region globally. And when we start stuttering, as we're seeing around the world today, the world starts stuttering in dangerous ways.
Could I add one thing to this, because that's very important, what Ian said. Since 2012, when President Obama started talking about the pivot to Asia, it's been now several years, and almost like a cottage industry has developed, where people claim that they can actually do a political sleight of hand and offset the decreased defense spending and the size and all of that, and somehow leave Europe to the Europeans, as though we could forfeit one of our key operational theaters and disaggregate it from the other. I think that's a fundamentally flawed thinking. These two theaters are not an either-or proposition. They're part of the same problem set. The United States that's securing Europe can operate in other theaters and other areas. The United States securing the Pacific can do the same thing in other theaters. It's simple geopolitics when you look at the map, right? We're a continental island. We have the Navy written into our Constitution. We're kind of Great Britain on a continental scale. So I would love for the debate to come back to this understanding that the United States is both the Atlantic and the Pacific power, and the security in those two critical regions will define our security and peace around the globe. So
we have at least two 2 or 3 voices from. So maybe we can ask now we can take 3 or few questions, 4 even questions from the public, and then we'll sum up. Dalibor, please.
Thank you, Igor. On the question of the Scandinavian-Turkish relationship, just a footnote, maybe that relationship has always been bound to be fractured since the 1860 siege of Constantinople by the Vikings. And maybe the difficulties in Sweden's accession to NATO might be kind of ramifications of that original sin. But maybe we'll leave that for our panel to discuss. Andrew, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I think your point about the centrality of NATO and the importance of preserving it as one cohesive body, I think that point is well taken. But there is, in my view, a tension between this and previous administrations' insistence that Europeans do more for their conventional defense, and the U.S. proclivity to use weapons exports as a way of dealing with our own trade deficit. Right? Like when you expect Europeans to do more, it strikes me as only natural that Europeans will try to do more and invest into their own defense industrial base, particularly in a world in which the US clearly has many priorities, many other commitments around the world outside of Europe. The fact that the plurality of practically all weapon systems in Europe are American might be seen as a source of vulnerability. And you see now, the stepping up in defense spending, the new financing mechanisms that exist within the EU and in kind of unilateral way, kind of rubbing Americans the wrong way. You saw the response from the US ambassadors to NATO and the EU last month, basically sort of accusing Europeans of protectionism. So I wonder what your thinking is and what your advice would be both to Europeans and Americans on how to navigate these sort of tensions, which are real. I mean, it's public money is going to be spent somewhere. There are questions of kind of economic growth and jobs that you create. There are questions of kind of resilience of your supply chain and the fact that you don't want to be caught off guard if there is a Taiwan contingency or if this Iran war continues. How should the alliance be thinking about kind of
I think it's about, yeah, thank you. Look, it's a question about division of labor. Nobody in Europe produces the 5th generation aircraft. These are clearly American systems that need to be purchased. And systems integration and the rest of it, that's really the American side of the equation. The biggest challenge I see in NATO, during the Cold War, if the balloon were to go up, everybody was in the same pot. It didn't matter if you were in Spain or France or Germany. Right now, we've got this regionalized security optics. When you're on the border, it's Russia. Germany is no longer a frontier state. It's got buffers. France tells me, when I'm in Paris, that, Europe's southern border is now in the Sahel. And when I'm in Portugal, I have no idea what they're talking about other than migration. So you've got the segmentation of how we see threats and the principal challenges to come up with some consensus on how the alliance actually would act in the event that its interests are threatened or its security is threatened. And that requires leadership. And that's another problem that I have. From the US side, there's no need to insult your allies if you're trying to get something done, right? I am convinced the Europeans would negotiate whatever arrangements need to be made. There's just no point of doing this in private, doing kind of, they're useless, they don't do anything. The fact is, I remember Bob Gates, when he was Secretary of Defense, who was saying pretty much the same thing. If the Europeans don't resource their forces, then, new strategic concept will not be worth the paper it was written on. So it's not just, the Trump administration behaving this way, the Biden administration behaving differently. The Europeans have work to do. They've neglected it. But we need to also respond as allies should, which is, trying to get to a positive yes rather than creating friction.
Let me add to that, because I'm actually among those, maybe 1 or 2 people, who are kind of getting tired of the debate on burden sharing. We've crossed the Rubicon. The Europeans have demonstrated they're on a path to increasing their defense spending, and I'm actually confident they're going to deliver. I mean, think about the amount of spending that has increased. Estonia's tripled its defense spending over the last 4 years. Germany is clearly on track to becoming a military juggernaut with its spending. We have to remember that not only the Europeans are at fault for not having made these investments earlier, the United States has faltered in its leadership as supposedly the leader of NATO. Think of the US response in 2014 when the Russians invaded Crimea. We told the Ukrainians to stand down.
Yep.
In 2022, in 2021, when the Russians were deploying 100,000 troops on Ukraine's frontiers, clearly positioning themselves for invasion, what was the US response? Ditto. Maybe we flew a couple of intelligence planes over Polish airspace, Ukrainian airspace. Did we mobilize forces? Did we encourage our Europeans to mobilize forces? No, we didn't. And then when the Russians began their invasion, the United States cut and ran from Ukraine. We pulled our embassy out. We pulled our forces out of Western Ukraine. Out of Western Ukraine. How is that leadership? So when you're beating up the Europeans on burden sharing, as an American, we got to remember what we have faltered. And we need to stand up and live up our leadership responsibilities if we're going to claim that we're the leader of this alliance. And if we're not willing to take action as leaders, how can we expect our European allies to fulfill their responsibilities?
Good point.
Thank you. There's many questions. I have one fundamental question. How much time?
all
When
your
shall
fault.
we
Look at that.
finish? 10:40? Okay. So Ian, then lady there, and I would. So
I have a follow-up to Dalibor's question, but I will not go back to Mehmet.
Mike.
I will not go back to Mehmet II, Sultan, but I have a very appropriate question for a physician regarding military capabilities. So let's just assume Northeastern NATO flank integrates, there is more spending. Let's say in 5-7 years, what are the unique American military capabilities that Europe will never replace? So enablers, command and control. And a follow-up question in a way. America or US always likes to control the escalation ladder. So let's say things will get hot one day. What is the chance that if Europe continues to buy your American armor and military equipment, that there will be a little switch that if push comes to shove, the switch will be turned off and Europe cannot use military equipment from the US? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll pick a few questions and then let you summarize. Yep. Okay. This lady there, a few voices.
Thank you. I'm really curious about, I think one of the most important things with translating Europe's latent capability into active capability is physical military interconnectivity and military mobility. You have like a really strong Eastern coalition among Poland and the Baltic states advocating for interconnectivity between Western and Eastern Europe. Think of the Central European pipeline system. Poland's been advocating for that to be extended to the eastern flank for at least 20 years. Even to the granular level of rail gauges not matching up such that Western military capabilities can't be moved to the eastern flank. So I'm curious as to your thoughts as to what the Eastern Coalition can do better within NATO to effectively get Western European states to extend their military mobility capabilities and ensure physical interconnectivity between NATO militaries.
Thank you. There was a gentleman here.
Yes. Hi, Zach Schneider from Ukrainian Congress Committee. One of the questions that I've had is we've had a great conversation about the normative security and defense arrangements, but what are the political constraints, kind of going off of the theme of these questions, what are the political constraints to those kind of normative commitments that we see that you guys are discussing? Thank you.
Please, could you pass a mic to the lady? There's a mic coming.
Thanks. My name's Anita Parlow. I was with the original Polar program at the now defunct Wilson Center. My question is this. I've been working on, almost finished a lengthy article on hybrid war in the maritime Arctic. And I'm wondering where you place capabilities with respect to maritime Arctic or hybrid war, hybrid war specifically within the framework of NATO, and what capabilities are needed. Thank you.
And there was one more voice here. Or not? Am I mistaken? Okay, if not, then please pick any question you feel comfortable with.
Sure. On hybrid war, I don't think it's so much a matter of the transatlantic community needing new capabilities. It's really a matter of the transatlantic community responding to Russia's aggression. So think about this. Maybe I don't even consider this a hybrid attack, but Russia sent 22, 24 drones deep into Poland. That is the first premeditated, significant military assault by an adversary on a NATO ally. And what has been our response? We haven't even sanctioned Russia on that economically. Maybe we've done something covertly, but it's certainly not resonating in any public way. Russia's gone over and cut cables across the Baltic Sea. How have we responded? Hats off to the Nordics and to Poland for wrapping up a couple of these Russian shadow ships. But we have to, when it gets into hybrid warfare, we are in a defensive crouch. And that just basically encourages Russia to escalate its attacks, to push more, push more. And even when we're in a defensive crouch, it's a win for Russia. Because while it may not be a cataclysmic physical kinetic impact that it has, it raises questions about alliance unity, alliance decisiveness, maybe even raises notions of alliance intimidation. And that's bad. So we don't need new tools. We need to respond more assertively to this Russian aggression, which is becoming increasingly dangerous.
I think this is critical, and I actually don't like to use the term hybrid warfare. It's been so bandied about in the media all the time. I prefer to talk about phase 0 of this campaign. If you look how the Russians are shaping the battlefield, using intrusions, using cyber attacks, destroying cables, I think this is probing for weaknesses and trying to get as much data as they can on when the radars light up and what the response time is and things of that sort. When I look at where their T-90 production is going, that is very disturbing to me, and the rest of it. I think right after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, I wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal where I said, when it comes to Russia and China, the West is suffering from a crisis of disbelief. We are not mentally in a fight. The Russians and the Chinese are. And one of the principal weaknesses that we have, as I said, I joked about this yesterday at dinner, I said to a German CSU politician, there's a difference between being fat and being strong. We're fat, but that fat is not translated into real capabilities. It comes down to leadership. I mean, how many, over the last 4 years, we're in the 5th year of this war, how many European leaders or US leaders have leveled with the American public and the European public about how dangerous the situation is fast becoming? And the second point to Jan's question about escalation management, that is also something that drives me bonkers. President Biden, I was very proud of that moment when he said, no mas, this will not stand, we will support Ukraine. What followed? Total confusion. What was the vision of victory? What was the strategy? We've committed the prestige of the NATO alliance, of our European allies. Putin is not fighting Ukraine. This is not over a sliver of territory. He's fighting a civilizational war against the West. If he wins, he has defeated the West, he has defeated NATO. There are horrendous consequences of this. Just like in this current war in the Middle East. If the regime remains in place, the narrative will be very simple. We stood up to the great Satan and the little Satan, and we're still there. This has tremendous implications on global power distribution. So I would love for our policy elites to get away from this preoccupation with escalation management, articulate clear targets, and work in that direction. I will also follow up on what Ian said about the intrusions into NATO airspace. Mark Rutte, whom I greatly appreciate and respect, I think he's one of the most able and capable Secretary Generals of NATO. But he said, we will escort Russian planes elegantly out of our airspace, and that's a sign of our strength. Are you kidding me? The Russian jets are loitering 10 miles away from Tallinn in Estonia. The government has to evacuate. And we're going to escort them elegantly? No. You put a missile under their tail, and the Russians will get it. But we ourselves are self-deterring because we don't have the mindset that puts us in this fight. And that makes the West weaker. And that's what allows Russia to constantly probe and cross the line and go further. And that's the political dimension of where we are. Fat times produce managers, you know. When I remember Chancellor Scholz, you know, when somebody takes your last name and makes it into American English, into a verb, stop Scholzing, you're in trouble, right? On the one hand, on the other hand, I remember Finns telling me a joke that when President Macron went to meet Putin for the first time, he went as Macron, came back as Mikon. You know,
How about Merzing?
Oh, Merzing, you know, this is what I'm talking about. We are in a situation where we need clear leadership, and we need those leaders to unify the alliance. That's the problem that I see.
I got a question from, I believe, from Poland, because since this panel
We didn't answer your question.
So you still can do it. You mentioned Poland. So and a lack of leaders. How? This is a question which came online from viewers, I believe, from Poland. How can Poland advocate for strengthening the NATO alliance in the US, and what role should Poland play, or can Poland play in this strengthening this region capabilities?
As the great philosopher Woody Allen once said, the meaning of life is to show up, right? I think Poland should be present, not just in Washington, but in those key capitals, providing leadership, articulating the need for cooperation, setting aside the internal kind of what Ian described, that constant pounding between the two camps in Polish politics, and develop a consensus on national security. It's the irreducible function of the state. If you can't provide for it, you will not determine your political system, and you will not be able to remain sovereign for very long. This is the key, I think, is bringing those resources, that latent capacity that's out there, finally into play. I mean, this is not about burden sharing, Ian. This is about creating real deterrent forces in Europe. And who is most dependent on this? I mean, the Baltic states are city-states, with all due respect to very brave, wonderful people. How many people are in Estonia right now? Over 1 million, right? Lithuania, Latvia. It's 20 miles from the Belarusian border to Vilnius. Imagine if the Russians roll in the tanks, capture the capital of Lithuania, it's over, right? So this is what our leaders should be telling the public, asking people to actually invest in defense resources. My money is on free societies. I think if you mobilize free nations, they're unbeatable. But to mobilize them, you need leaders who actually are telling them the truth.
Thank you so
Igor,
much
let me just add to that. First, let me be very clear, because what I'll say may come across as a criticism. Poland has been a model ally. Poland has been a positive voice here in the halls of Washington, D.C. It is modernizing its military. It is growing its military. It has been courageous in its stand against Russian aggression in Ukraine, against the Baltics, in the Baltic Sea. Its generosity to the Ukrainian refugees, it has given homes to and hospitality to, is a role model for all nations. So, you know, Poland is already doing many things right. If it could do anything more, I would say it'd be twofold. One, it needs to take national security off the table of partisan battles.
Here, here.
Because it dilutes the impact of its voice here and across Europe. And Poland's voice is so important, particularly here in Washington, D.C., because when it comes down to supporting Ukraine, what Poland doesn't do resonates powerfully with this current administration, the Trump administration. Which leads me to kind of my second point. I think Poland ought to be more prominent in its posture regarding a future deterrent force in Ukraine. It shouldn't be quiet on that issue. It should be right up with the French and the Germans saying, we are ready to put Polish forces into Ukraine. When it doesn't do that, it really resonates badly here. Needless to say, it doesn't resonate well in Ukraine, doesn't resonate the way we want it in Russia, and doesn't resonate the way we want it across Europe. But when Poland says we're not willing to do it, it really undercuts the efforts of those who are trying to get the Washington administration to really be a robust part of that future deterrent force.
This is a topic for another conference. our Polish presence in Ukraine, it raises lots of discussions and controversy. Thank you so much. Please applaud Jan Brzezinski, Andrew Michta, also Radek Fogiel.
And Igor Janka.
Thank you, Igor. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
So I suggest we break for 15 minutes, and we'll reconfigure the stage. And I know this panel is a tough act to follow, but we'll try our best with the panel focus on the Nordic countries starting at 10:55 in this auditorium. So feel free to stretch your legs, get a coffee, and then please come back. Thank you.
misforståelser og unge gutter på 25 år som flyr feil. Altså, vi har ikke støttet fra USA engang. Så vi vil da gjøre vår egen assessment based on our intelligence. Interceptions, yeah. Interceptions, yeah.
I thought we lost Heather along the way. Good. I think we'll get going. Thank you, Andrew. Well, good morning, everybody. I think we are going to get started with our second panel of this morning's conference. Warm welcome to all of you. I think in the next hour or so, what I would like to do is to pull some of the threads that Igor highlighted in his panel, and we'll zoom in more to the north of Poland and to the north of the Baltic Sea, and like to explore some of the shared Nordic answers to this common security challenge that presents itself to us in 2026. And I'd like to explore how this bloc of countries that might or might not include Poland could act as a cohesive one, also in the relationship with the United States. And I'm delighted to explore these questions with three extremely distinguished panelists. I'm going to start with Ambassador Anniken Huitfeldt, who has served since August 2024 as the Norwegian ambassador to Washington. And before then, she served as the country's foreign minister, as the country's Minister of Culture, Minister of Labor and Social Inclusion, and Minister for Children and Equality. So it's
And sport, you forgot
and
that.
Sport. Well,
Especially after the Winter Olympics, that's very important.
We should not forget about sports. I should also stress that beyond her political life, also served as a member of parliament, she is not new to the world of think tanks. She worked at an organization called the FAFO Foundation, which is the kind of labor union think tank focused on social affairs and labor relations, if I'm not mistaken. Equally happy to be joined by my wonderful colleague Heather Conley, who is a fellow at AEI, working on transatlantic security and geopolitics of Europe, Eurasia, and the Arctic. And the relations and deepening cooperation, especially in the Arctic, between China and Russia. She has an exciting book project in the works about the Arctic, and I'm sure, like all book authors, she loves answering questions about how her book is coming along. So we'll get to that in a moment. Before joining AEI, Heather worked as the president of the German Marshall Fund here in Washington. She worked as Senior Vice President for Europe at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She had a very distinguished government career in the State Department, where she served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European Eurasian Affairs, and also coordinated U.S. assistance to new independent states in the 1990s. And finally, we have a representative of one of the new NATO member states, Sweden, namely Eric Bradberg, who is, I think it's fair to say, Washington's favorite Swede.
Wow.
Swedish American.
Now that's a title.
Is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and he is also a managing partner, a co-founder of the Brzezinski Global Strategy. So we just had Ian at the previous panel, and so his brother Mark, who is a significant diplomat and geopolitical thinker in his own right, he and Eric have their own business advising whoever needs advice on Central and Eastern Europe. Now, Eric worked in the world of think tanks and consulting. He's been through many organizations in this town, including the Albright Stonebridge Group, the Carnegie Endowment just next door, the Atlantic Council, Stockholm Peace Institute, the McCain Institute for International Leadership, and several other organizations. And Eric, I think it makes sense to start this panel with you, actually. So on March 7th, we celebrated the second anniversary of Sweden's accession to NATO. People might remember that Finland had joined a little earlier. Now, if you reflect on those 2 years since Sweden joined NATO, and if you reflect on the turbulent politics we've seen on this side of the Atlantic, would you say Swedes are happy with how things turned out, or is this not quite what they signed up for?
Sure. Well, thank you, Dalibor. And first of all, congrats to you, AI, and Warsaw Freedom Institute for convening this important discussion. I would say that they're happy. I think their membership in NATO so far has been a big success. Let me give you 3 reasons. First, I mean, most obviously, it's improved their security, but it's also improved regional security in the Baltic Sea region. I mean, they enjoy Article 5 protection. They're fully insinuated in NATO's planning and structures and operations. And as a result of that, Baltic Sea security has now improved by removing that kind of gray zone that existed before, right? For instance, the Swedes can now count on that Gotland, this strategic island in the middle of the Baltic Sea, is not protected by NATO. But as a consequence of that, it also means that NATO can better project defense to defend the Baltic states. Or Finland, which has an 833-mile border with Russia, there's now a multinational NATO battle group placed in northern Finland. But Finland, with its, and we heard from the previous panel, with its large reserve force and biggest artillery in Europe, can also help defend NATO and also makes Russia's military planning more difficult, and that's a good thing for NATO security. So there's been a shift in strategic thinking, I think, in both Stockholm and Helsinki, going from prioritizing national territorial defense to really thinking about regional defense and security and kind of projecting that out. The Swedes, for instance, have been deploying troops to Latvia as part of the forward presence, air policing with the Gripens. So very much thinking about this from a regional point of view. That's the first point. Security has improved for them. Second point is, I think they see themselves as bringing critical capabilities that are good for NATO while also enhancing their own standing in the alliance. I mean, just look at Alexander Stubb as kind of one of the key leaders at the international stage, a key kind of Trump whisperer that very much stems from Finland's new status as a leading NATO ally. A lot of attention to what these countries can do, also in terms of civil defense and resilience for their leaders, the sort of total defense concept, something that other NATO allies are looking at them for advice, and also bringing this kind of high-tech mindset on whether it's defense industry, whether it's 5G and 6G, those are areas where they can contribute. And then thirdly, and I think that's something we'll talk about here, it's really strengthened regional cooperation, most obviously with the other Nordics. I mean, Nordic defense cooperation has always been around, but it's always was kind of awkward because Sweden and Finland were not full NATO members. Now the full potential of Nordic defense cooperation is being unleashed. We're seeing progress on building more of an integrated air force. We're seeing progress on defense industrial cooperation. We're seeing NORDEFCO, this kind of format, being kind of upgraded and have a new level of ambition. So this is very good news. And I think that also extends to the Baltics. The NB8, really in the wake of the Ukraine war, has become this kind of key pillar for supporting Ukraine, for bringing these countries together, also to think about regional security. And there's much more that they can do together on defense industrial cooperation and integration. And I think if you bring in Poland to that, as we heard from the previous panel, you're really getting a critical mass here. Poland emerging as kind of a Baltic Sea superpower together with the Nordics, especially, and as we heard from Ian very correctly, working closely with the Swedes. So I think all of these things means that this has been hugely successful. Of course, to your point, Dalibor, there are question marks, right? I think the alliance that Sweden and Finland joined in order to get ironclad Article 5 protection looks a little bit different now. Some of the assumptions are different from when they joined a couple of years ago. I mean, just look at the US National Defense Strategy. It makes it very clear that the priorities are Western Hemisphere, Indo-Pacific, and then Europe. Look at the Greenland crisis just a couple of months ago. And this was a critical crisis for the alliance that really threatened to kind of unravel alliance solidarity. And now we have the Iran war, with sort of demands from Washington for European countries to contribute to a war that they had no role in starting. So I think there are serious concerns, but I don't think that is leading to buyer's remorse. I think these countries are fully embracing their new NATO membership identity. They are building security with the region, I think, in a way to try to be model allies, both for the United States, but also to strengthen kind of this regional Northern European security, also to have a plan B should it ever be necessary in the future.
So Heather, if I'm going to let you cook with some of the ingredients that Eric put on the table, specifically this question of Greenland. So how much of a kind of bitter aftertaste has the affair left? Some people would say that it has never really gone away, that it's something that can resurface again and again. Or has perhaps Donald Trump done us all a service by bringing attention to the High North and the way the Nordic allies are contributing to Arctic security?
Well, Dalibor, thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership here at AEI. It's great to be with everyone. You know, I think the Greenland crisis, and Eric, you're right, it was just 2 months ago that we were at a moment of absolute crisis, just to tell you how quickly things shift in attention. But that crisis, I believe, fundamentally changed the transatlantic security relationship, because it's the first time in NATO's 77-year history, I believe, where the United States openly threatened the sovereignty of another NATO member. And that changed the relationship. Now, we don't know entirely how that works, but I think it needs to be acknowledged that was a very significant change. It certainly has changed our allies' approach to Arctic security and their own security. And I think we should also acknowledge Canada has now put forward a significant security package. Just this week announced 25 billion Canadian dollars to put forward operating locations, a huge persistent presence in Canada in the north. Obviously their contribution to NORAD missile modernization, patrol vessels, satellites, sensors. This makes America safer. Denmark, Kingdom of Denmark, 6.4 billion Danish kroner Arctic security package. Again, aircraft, patrol vessels, sensors. This is exactly what we seek. I don't believe it would have happened absent President Trump threatening incorporation, threatening purchase. It's changed NATO's policy. So today, cold response, exercise cold response is happening. Now under Arctic Sentry, which the NATO had for too long stayed away from this. And sometimes the Canadian government said, stay away from it, this is sovereignty. Sometimes the United States said, stay away from that. But now we see NATO stepping forward, and it has fundamentally changed US policy. Dalibor, to your point, and I think if reading the NDI's annual threat assessment, the difference between 2025 and 2026, the Arctic is now part of homeland defense. And I think this is where we can talk about this, how this shifts the mentality, because this makes Northern Europe, we talked about the shields of the America for the Southern Hemisphere. Canada and the Nordic countries are our shield, our northern shield of the Americas, and thinking about that in a homeland security context is very significant. We also see new leadership models. Again, hope we unpack this a little bit. Look at IcePac. Helping America build new icebreakers, desperately needed. We're doing that in cooperation with Finland and Canada because we lack that experience. That's a new leadership model for shipbuilding. Some of these things. So we're building something very new here, but it comes at an extraordinary cost because much of the security packages that our allies are building, of course, are for Arctic security and anticipating the transformation of a region. but with one eye on the United States. And right now, these packages aren't being knitted the way they should be with the United States. They're being knit regionally, an Arctic 6 rather than an Arctic 7 with the United States. So much to unpack there.
Now, Ambassador, you're currently a diplomat, but you're also somebody who had an extraordinary political career. And with that, I would imagine, comes a sense of understanding and appreciation of political history of the part of the world you're coming from. And I think it's fair to say, it's not an overstatement to say that we are living through really unhinged, unprecedented geopolitical times at this moment. And what happens in such times in history is that the existing political structures are tested, they sometimes adapt, sometimes they break apart, sometimes they become irrelevant. In Europe, we live with NATO, we live with the EU, we live with this whole post-war architecture that was built on a certain set of assumptions that might be changing in front of our eyes. And when I zoom in at the Nordic countries, I see a part of Europe that has a long history of sometimes tighter and sometimes looser forms of political integration. The Kalmar Union, the 19th century political union between Sweden and Norway. Right now, outside of the confines of the EU, there is the Nordic Council that brings Nordic parliaments together to work on human rights issues and other questions. I wonder, under the current pressure coming both from Russia, from the unpredictability of this US administration and just changing geopolitics, to what extent there is a sort of political ferment going on in your part of the world that would look at different and new ways of these countries huddling together, working together and building perhaps new political structures to get itself through these turbulent times.
Thank you for having me in this very interesting panel and for very, very good questions. I would say that I don't see really the need for new pillars. We have a lot of organizations and body, and we try to keep them alive. But we are being much more integrated than before. Heather just mentioned Canada, and there was a Nordic-Canadian summit in Norway last week as a part of this huge military exercise called Response. So this is only one of very many proof on increased defense cooperation. So we don't want to establish a kind of Nordic NATO pillar. We want to be integrated, all the Nordic countries, into the NATO body. If we took part in this discussion during the Cold War, I would then talk about, with my Swedish friend here, about Nordic balance. Because Finland had this so-called agreement with Soviet Union that put constraints on their foreign policy. And Sweden was, after World War II, the Norwegian Prime Minister tried so hard to get Sweden into NATO. So he was very, very disappointed. But the Swedish concern, but this will be a problem for Finland, and would tighten the grip from the Soviet Union on Finland. So we went over to Britain. The Norwegian defense minister at that time and the defense minister asked the British defense minister, his counterpart, should we try even harder to get Sweden in? And he said, yes, we need them into NATO because we need a coherent strategy from the Baltic Sea to the Barents Sea. So we didn't make that then, but now we can do that after so many years. So concretely, we can now plan for reinforcement to the port of Gothenburg, the biggest port in the Nordic countries. We couldn't do that before. So we've seen a difference in the Swedish strategy from the 1990s. Before, they talked about, we are a neutral country. The last years, you've said that you are non-aligned. So that was we saw that step by step. I think that Finland changed their opinion on NATO membership before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In December 2021, Putin gave a speech, and he said then, we should not allow new countries to be taken up as members of NATO. That reminded them of the future. We want to not be put under pressure from Moscow any longer. We need to take action now. And that also changed the Swedish discussion. So from being, some politicians were reluctant, others were more eager to join NATO. That united really the Swedish opinion, and I followed that discussion very closely, and it happened so fast. So I think that from trusting a kind of implicit security guarantee before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, you really needed it in black and white. I mean, you wanted to be a part of Article 5. So I think we need more operational cooperation. We don't need new bodies. We have a lot of bodies in the Nordic region. We have the Baltic Council, we have the Barents Council, we have the Nordic Council. Yeah, very, very many international bodies. But we need more operational defense cooperation. That's what we really need. And I just want to have one comment to the previous panel about, I mean, we see Russian activity up in the high north. And there was a reference to countries escorting Russian aircrafts out of international airspace. And we do that very often from Norway. Actually, 50 times, I think, in average every year we do that. They're sending up their bombers, and then we send one of our, or 2 or 3 of our F-35, our new F-35. Norway was the first country to receive the whole fleet. And then we carefully escort them out of those territories. I think that's very important. It demonstrates strength, but at the same time, we live so close to the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. So we need to avoid any misunderstanding. Strength and avoid misunderstanding. That's how we operate up in the high north.
So you made the reference to Russia's nuclear arsenal, and Eric made reference to potential need for a plan B besides NATO membership. And so maybe I want to spend a few minutes on that. So one important component of NATO, obviously, is the access to the full escalatory ladder that the US nuclear deterrent offers. And it's a sort of awkward discussion, but it's still one that's ongoing in Europe. Is, you know, like what happens if we Europeans, speaking as an Eastern European in Washington, don't have access to that nuclear ladder? And so we know that France has a nuclear deterrent, which is small and it's under French control. The British have a nuclear deterrent, which is not fully autonomous of the United States. Is there a conversation among like-minded Nordic countries and or Poland about acquiring your own nuclear deterrent? Because if there is, I would argue that that would actually require kind of building political institutions to underpin it. I don't think that Sweden will be individually getting nuclear weapons or that Norway would be doing so. I think it would be done through a consortium of countries, and I think you then need to kind of think through the politics and the kind of decision-making mechanisms surrounding the use of such a deterrent. Or am I just kind of, you know, living in my kind of, you know, fever dreams, and this discussion is not happening at all?
We don't really have that discussion in Norway now. We don't feel that is being threatened from our most important ally, the United States. There is a discussion on military conventional presence in Europe, but the nuclear umbrella hasn't been threatened the same way.
I mean, I would agree. I think what's striking to me about the conversation about nuclear deterrence, that it's coming from Europe, not the United States. The United States has never threatened that it would remove forces. So, I mean, I understand the insecurity of that. I mean, I think that's important. And, you know, NATO has a nuclear planning group. That is where it is based. I think the conversation is whether some NATO allies would like to be included in the burden sharing and have the F-35s to be able to now, and that would be a very different posture on the eastern flank. Finland, I think, has you know, beginning to open some aperture, but it's been challenging for both Sweden and Finland even to get, you know, parliamentary changes to allowing nuclear weapons. So I agree. I think there is I think I understand the concern. I would caution our European colleagues, don't go places where we're not needing to go yet. We need to strengthen NATO's nuclear deterrent. And if we start going in that direction, I don't think it's healthy for the alliance itself.
Yeah, I completely agree with Heather. I mean, I think in many ways, this second Trump administration has been much more clear about its commitment to NATO than in the first Trump administration. We had all these questions, will the US lead NATO and so on and so forth. I think they've been very clear. We're part of NATO, but we expect the Europeans to take on more leadership for defense and deterrence. But we will continue to supply nuclear deterrence and key enablers in Europe. By the way, we have the same debate in Poland as well about potentially hosting nuclear weapons on Polish territory. I think there are discussions taking place in Europe, to your point, Dalibor. We've certainly saw President Macron's speech a couple of weeks ago, sort of suggesting that France could extend some of its nuclear capabilities. I think these are discussions that are ongoing, and I think it reflects the uncertainty. But at the same time, I think we have something in place that works, and I think we should focus on strengthening that.
So Eric, while I got you on the line, I would like to kind of connect this panel a little bit to the previous one, which was very kind of Poland-centric. A few days ago, the King of Sweden, Carl Gustaf, made a state visit to Poland, which was very striking in its optics. So not only there would be the usual Polish pomp and circumstance, but the King also hosted a dinner of his own at the Warsaw Castle, which was the seat of the Warsaw kings of Poland. It was Sigismund III who moved the capital to Warsaw. And the optics of seeing a Swedish king host a dinner in Warsaw, I mean, to me, really signaled a sort of new level of political commitment from Sweden in particular to Poland. Again, is this just a figment of my imagination, or is there kind of a real kind of shift in these Nordic attitudes towards Poland in particular, and kind of forging of new ties that go from the sublime to the very practical, such as cooperation on anti-drone equipment, which is ongoing between a Polish and a Norwegian company, as it turns out?
Yeah, I think it goes both ways. It's the Nordics looking at Poland, and it's the Poland looking at the countries in the Baltic Sea states. I mean, I think at least the Swedes and maybe other Nordics have traditionally looked at Poland as kind of being in Central Europe, kind of far away, different. I think they're increasingly seeing Poland as like-minded. They share the same threat perception. They share the same view about the need to support Ukraine. They increasingly share in common economic ties. So I think increasingly Poland, from a kind of Scandinavian point of view, is viewed as part of the Baltic Sea. And we're seeing Poland. I mean, Poland was the country that instigated, in many ways, the Baltic Sentry to protect critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. As Ian pointed out, Polish paratroopers landing on the island of Gotland during an exercise. The Swedes selling the submarines, these ultra-quiet submarines, to Poland. So this is increasingly, I think, a relationship based on values, on commerce, on relationships, but at the heart of it is security and securing the Baltic Sea. And I think from Poland's perspective, as we heard in the previous panel, it is also orienting itself more to the Northeast, where it can be a major player and work more closely with these countries. So I think it goes both ways. And I think the state visit by the King, who, by the way, brought with him a whole group of companies, including defense companies, to talk about Swedish-Polish defense industrial cooperation. It's very telling. And I think it reflects that growing interest from both sides. And I expect that will continue. And you're seeing Poland, again, increasingly be part of these Nordic, Baltic, NB8 plus Poland formats, speaking with a common voice, coordinating diplomatically on matters like Ukraine or related to Russia. I think that's something that we should look for more of.
This might be a premature question, but I wonder where Ukraine would fit into this scheme as well. I know that the conversation right now is focused on making sure that Ukraine wins its war, but I think people in the region might be thinking about what happens next, especially about integrating the defense industrial base that Ukraine has into the broader NATO infrastructure. I mean, are you aware of kind of joint work being done, especially when it comes to kind of defense procurement, anti-drone systems, and so on and so forth, that would kind of bring Ukraine into the fold of this kind of northeastern flank of countries?
Well, Dalibor, if I can, I want to get to that question, but I think I just want to pull Eric's thread a little bit more. I think we're starting to see Poland now wrestle, and the alliance is wrestling with, Poland is now a hinge country. We always think of Poland as the leader of the eastern flank. And now we are seeing constituted a very more cohesive northern flank. And this is the challenge we get into when we talk about Joint Forces Command. Are you Norfolk or are you Brunssum? This is the Baltic, is it the Arctic? The Russians see this as one AOR, one area of responsibility. We're the ones that are bifurcating it. And this is the challenge. So this would be my unsolicited advice to our Polish colleagues, that I would begin to start arching into the northern flank and play a more prominent role. Become, if possible, part of the Joint Expeditionary Forces. Start to see yourself as a hinge to be able, because what the Nordics are doing, and what we just saw yesterday's announcement, Finland, UK, Netherlands, and I also want to say, just before I get to Ukraine, the UK is becoming central to this northern flank dimension. Northern Group from 2012, Jeff, yes, it's still still growing into it, yes. But I think what we're seeing, and this is where we start getting into some drifting in some risky territory. We're now talking about potentially a regionalization of NATO that we have to be careful about. But I think you're starting to see where like-mindeds with interoperable capabilities, anti-submarine warfare, and this you're starting to now build something that I think is actually more exciting that's happening on the northern flank, potentially, than on the eastern flank. We have to be able to do both, but Poland needs to lean into this. And it sits on the Polish-Swedish submarine element and the tech environment. And here it comes to my Ukraine point, because absolutely, Ukraine is at the center of building this northeastern hinge. And if you don't incorporate Ukraine into the defense, the adaptation, what we're learning, what they're teaching us, they're the most capable military on Russian hybrid activities or conventional capabilities, we're totally missing a trick. So I think we have to reconceptualize this. We need a northeastern hinge. Poland could be at the center of that if its politics would allow it. But that's the rub we have to fix in the alliance.
If I may, I wonder if we want to shift the gears a little bit and focus on questions that are not kind of...
Can I just add something
please.
on Greenland?
Please do.
Because you referred to the Kalmar Union. That was when all the Nordics were together, and Greenland was, of course, discovered by a Norwegian Viking, and it used to be a part of Norway. And when we got our independence, we thought it was a good idea to make Norway great again and grab Greenland back. So some Norwegians tried to occupy the eastern part of Greenland, and we lost tremendously in the International Court of Justice. And the defense minister at that time, he ended up being the Nazi leader of Norway during World War II. So don't do that.
That is quite a cautionary tale.
Greenland belongs to the Kingdom of Denmark.
Full stop.
Yeah.
I think that's something that everybody on this panel can agree on. So I was wondering if you want to spend a few minutes on the economy of the region. So we heard on the previous panel that Poland has the fastest growing economy in the EU, but it's also fair to say that Nordics are among the places in Europe that have their economic act together. I mean, Sweden has been singularly successful at producing startups and unicorns in particular, whether it's Minecraft or Candy Crush or Spotify or any other number of things. I mean, Norway is setting oil aside, a very impressive economic success story. Now, these are unfortunately exceptions rather than the rule on the European continent. And we've been having a discussion for well over a year now about improving Europe's competitiveness, about investing into infrastructure, filling the investment gap, as Mario Draghi identified it, improving the single market. And the progress has been slow. There was a lot of talk, not quite enough policy action. I know Norway is not part of the EU, but it's part of the single market. And I wonder to what extent there might be a way for like-minded countries inside and outside of the EU that are part of the single market to think about ways to go above and beyond their single market commitments and try to kind of do pro-growth policies, structural reforms, deepening of the economic integration without really waiting for everybody in EU 27 to get their act together? Or am I, again, living in fantasy world?
I mean, economic integration in the Nordics and the Baltics is already very strong. Let's remember, I mean, the Nordics were instrumental in bringing economic prosperity to the Baltics after the end of the Cold War, right? And rebuilding them in many ways as a model, and that's been hugely successful. Just look at Estonia, also leading tech player in the world in terms of digitalization, in terms of companies like Skype and Bolt and others now leading on defense innovations. I would include the Baltics into this, and I think what these countries, to your point, Dalibor, share in common is both the fact that they are 33 million people, that combined is actually a G7-sized economy. I think we underestimate that as a bloc. And they share in common, I think, an approach to free markets, to enterprise, to innovation and tech, and to a view of Europe that is embracing those values, that is embracing competitiveness. They want to see an EU that focuses on strengthening and completing the single market project, rather than necessarily going too far down the line towards sovereignty and sort of types of buy Europe-only solutions that excludes other like-minded partners. I think they're quite open to international partnerships. Just earlier this week, Sweden was the first EU country to join Pax Silica, this Trump administration initiative to secure silicon critical supply chains that has an impact for semiconductors. I think that's a great example of what you can do both to strengthen Europe and in a critical area, but also to work with like-minded partners, whether that's the US, whether it's Japan, South Korea. So I think these countries kind of share that vision in common, and they bring that as a group to European dynamics. And I think if Poland is increasingly part of that, and Poland as an economic miracle, just earlier this week, there were 2 articles in major US news outlets, NBC and ABC, praising Poland as an economic miracle. Poland is invited to be part of the G20 this year. It's a G20-sized economy. So this group of countries together have a lot to offer, and I hope that they will continue to play that role at a European level and at an international level.
Ambassador, I'm sort of hoping for your take on this as well, given that Norway is in this position of a kind of rule taker with regard to the EU, but it's obviously an important country in its own right, and in this kind of plurilateral format, it could be a sort of driver of positive change in economic integration. I mean, is this something that is on the table, kind of bringing service markets, for example, more closely together?
Yeah, I mean, we have particular knowledge on the energy sector, so we are trying to take advantage on that. Also regard to renewables, so we're kind of using the technology from hydropower and oil and gas in order to be also in the forefront when it comes to renewable energy. And I believe the most important thing that we have done for Polish security is building a new pipeline down to Poland, and we were also able to ramp up our energy production after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And we are now the main provider of gas to Europe, and that has been extremely important for their sense of feeling more secure. So Norway is a part of the single market, so we comply with all their internal regulations. That's not the problem, I would say, for Norway. Some politicians would disagree with me on that, but I think first and foremost that gives us access. We don't have influence the same way as other European members, but we have voted 2 times no to Norwegian membership in the European Union. We're a very, very united people, except on this matter. And I don't think that there will be a new application before we know that there is a majority in favor of Norwegian EU membership. I think maybe the discussion would have been differently if Britain hadn't left the European Union, but we are very, very connected to Britain and also to United States. So I don't want to go deep into history, but when EU came up as an idea, Norway thought it was a better idea to make a NATO or economic NATO, because we are much more connected to the US and UK than very many other European countries. And also when it comes to defense, because we talked about defense area, and we do much more with Poland, with Germany, and also with the Nordic countries. But at the end of the day, we have to rely on the capabilities from Britain and United States operating or dealing with this huge neighbor on the Russian side with their huge nuclear capabilities. So we're very much westward-leaning country, and I believe there is a strong future for Europe when it comes to technology, and that's also a surplus or an advantage, I think, for Norway, because we're not really competing with American companies. We have niche skills on certain technologies that could be helpful in order to develop also American economy in the future.
Finally, before I open it up, since Germany got mentioned a couple of times, and it is an important player, it's a Baltic power as well. What is your hope that Germany can be sort of awakened from its current slumber, if I may put it that way? I mean, yeah, there have been tremendous progress made since 2022, but I still argue that we don't quite have Germany where we would like it to see and play its full role in European security, and also as a driver of, say, economic integration and positive developments in the EU. Are you Germany glass half full or half empty in your opinion?
Fuller and fuller, I would say. And we rely now much more, I think, all European countries on the situation and the economy of Germany, and they are really a driving force, I think, in Europe right now. And if you look at their defense spending, they have increasingly been able to prioritize that. So from a Norwegian perspective, and I believe also from a Swedish point of view, that we see, I mean, really Germany as the main driver in Europe right now.
Well, I mean, I think it's, when I think about the German defense spending, you have to have a purpose for your power. And I think Germany is struggling to understand its purpose with that military strength. It's acting in a backward-looking way, in some ways, to refill a lack of defense spending for 15 years. You have a very big hole to fill just to get back to sort of surface. And I think the question mark is, what is it for? I think you're right. Europe so relies on the German economy, and I think we really underappreciate the profound structural change that is now beginning to arrive in Germany. And I believe because they've sunk so much investment and their future into China, it will be extremely difficult to separate that out, their automotive sector, their chemical sector. Their 19th century economy has to be totally transformed. So I think we're about to see, maybe I'm wrong, some significant economic structural changes which will have ripple effects across Europe. So I agree with you completely. A strong Germany is essential. I just think we're entering a period where their politics are very, very difficult, as all of our politics are. The economic restructuring is going to be very painful, and they have to make some very fundamental decisions about what their defenses are for. And I think they are very much struggling with that. I think their chief of defense is trying to prepare their population for a difficult future, but I think they have a long way to go. So I agree with you. Love the direction of travel. Thank goodness we're there. I just think we're underestimating the pain and the restructuring that's about to happen.
Eric,
completely
bullish
agree.
or bearish on Germany?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think Germany's heading in the right direction. On Ukraine, they've emerged as the leading contributor to Ukraine. They could do more. Everyone could do more, but I think they've really emerged and taken it seriously. They're increasingly spending on defense. They're engaging also in Northern Europe. I think a challenge here, as we're talking about Northern Europe, is the Polish-German relationship. That's still very difficult, and that I think goes to both sides, need to work on that. But I think Germany's certainly heading in the right direction. I think Chancellor Merz has emerged as kind of a leader in Europe in many ways. So heading in the right direction, need to do more.
Let's open it up.
I think on those lines, I think Chancellor Merz is a very conflicted leader right now, and that comes through in his messaging.
Yes, please. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Klaus Lares. I'm a strong supporter of the European.
There's a mic coming to you, sir.
There's a microphone. There you go.
Sorry, Klaus Lares. I'm a strong supporter of the European project, as I think everyone here. But let me play devil's advocate. At the moment, it doesn't look good in Europe. I mean, there are the economic problems, lots of other problems. And we have centrifugal forces. Hungary, Slovakia, the Belgians want to open links, economic links with Russia again. Le Pen may be in power, or her deputy. The German AfD is a serious problem. There are other countries with serious problems. Is the European Union really going to survive, or are we seeing a splitting up, or maybe a small Europe, various little groups of European countries, whatever the scenario is? But the European Union as it is today, is that really the model for the future? Thank you.
That's a big question.
Wow.
You know, I never count out the durability of the European project. I think we've seen that in analyzing the Euro crisis, where I thought things would begin to unwind. They maintain. So never. I think we underestimate the presence and the power of that as an institution. But of course, everything you said is correct. I think the challenges that I see, particularly as the United States seeks a rebalancing of our security relationship, long overdue. And I think that's just, as an aside, both sides like their dependencies a little too much. The Europeans like the dependency on the security relationship because they could redirect their budgets elsewhere. And the United States really liked its Europe to be dependent, so we could tell you what to do. And Mr. Trump discovered that dependency also wasn't there when he wanted it this week. So we have to rebalance this relationship. It's going to be extremely painful. I think one of the quiet ways that the United States led in Europe was exactly your point. We were a very quiet mediator between European countries that disagreed, between France and Italy, particularly through NATO. We just quietly balanced and inserted ourselves. I think with this rebalancing act, and as we shift responsibilities, some of that will give. And I think this will highlight European countries, the tensions within European countries. But I believe Europe will endure because it must. But I think what you're seeing is it can't function at the larger number. So these mini-laterals, which is what we're seeing around the world, the multilateral institutions cannot move quick enough, cannot reform themselves quick enough. You're seeing these coalitions of the willing saying, I have to move forward. And hopefully then the multilateralism can reform. And so this is why I'm so excited about Northern Europe and this, forgive me, we're seeing the reconstitution of the Hanseatic Security and Economic League. That's what we're seeing. It's the natural tensions. That's dynamism. Lean into dynamism. Lean into where the right things are going. Be a part of that. And let's hope the rest of the apparatus follows. And just as a cautionary note, anyone here in the United States that wishes the fragmentation of Europe is wishing economic and security problems upon the United States. And so the glee that you find here in certain quarters about Europe, that it's challenges, oh my goodness, that should not be. I like the part that we want to lean in and be supportive of Europe. Of course, I don't, the civilizational erasure stuff is not helpful at all. No. We need to work together to increase our competitiveness, our supply chains, our critical minerals. We can win this competition with our allies, but we all have to work much differently and harder and not look at each other and say, boy, aren't you the problem? That's what our political parties do here. They don't solve problems. They just look at each other and say, you're the problem. We need to start solving these big problems because the global context that we're in right now is so highly unstable, and the adversaries have much greater first mover advantage in many ways. We need all of our allies to be strong and prosperous for us to manage this course. So I hope you're not right. I hope Europe endures and becomes stronger.
And just to build on Heather's point, I think a strong European Union is definitely still in the US interest, even more so at a time where we're asking Europe to do more, to take more responsibility. Having a strong European Union providing prosperity, but also, as we're looking to pivot to whether it's the Indo-Pacific or the Western Hemisphere, in many ways, Brussels is more strategic thinking about China issues than some of the member state capitals. So having a European Union that we can work with is important. That's why having these trade tensions across the Atlantic are very unfortunate, because it takes away the focus from what we should be focusing on, which is building our, reducing our mutual dependence on China and investing more in each other as trusted, like-minded partners. So that requires having a European Union as a partner, and that's in the US interest. And that's why encouraging anti-European governments, encouraging the unraveling of the EU, some of the language in the national security strategy, I think is kind of unfortunate and frankly self-defeating for the US and the strategic goals that the administration, I think correctly so, have laid out in terms of wanting a Europe that's stronger, that can do more.
I mean, I don't want to editorialize, but there is a striking tension, in my opinion, between asking Europeans to step up and do more and carry a greater portion of the burden of, say, conventional deterrence, and then dispatching the vice president to campaign on behalf of Viktor Orban in a place like Hungary.
So if there's one thing, we have to strike the word burden from our conversation. The defense of your country is a responsibility. It is never a burden. We all have our responsibilities, and we are stronger when we share those responsibilities, and we mutually strengthen ourselves. I agree with you. I do not understand why the United States would seek political support of particularly forces that are supportive of China, are supportive of Russia, and are at the heart anti-American in their spirit. I do not understand that. I think American diplomacy is best when we advance our strategic interests across a broad spectrum of political parties. That's how we move forward. And I understand the ideological perspective, but I think it is extremely short-sighted in advancing American strategic interests.
Ambassador, would you like to weigh in on the question of whether the EU will collapse?
I think you're right that we can see more polarization in Europe now, but much less than here. And very many countries have really come together after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and also when we look upon the situation here. So when I receive parliamentarian visitors from Norway now, they're very, very united in their message. And for the first time in history, they have anonymously adopted a long-term defense plan to Ukraine, but also to for increasing investments in Norwegian capabilities. So it goes both ways. And we also can see that in very many other European countries, that people are coming together because of the situation rather than being polarized. And I think at the end of the day, it's an economic issue. I mean, the European market now, if you have an idea on how much we benefit from that, to take that apart will be an economic disaster for all European countries. And the Brits didn't really vote against that common European economic free market zone. What they really voted against was the common European labour market, because they thought that took too many people from the rest of Europe, and that lowered the labour standards. So I think we benefit all from the common economic zone and the single market.
Andrew, please.
Oh, it's coming.
Thank you very much. A fascinating discussion. And I'd like to pick up on what Heather said about Germany. German rearmament, the purpose of German power, Germany's role in Europe, and especially how it relates to smaller states, not just Norway. And this is really a question for Annika and for Eric. I spent 12 years working in Germany. I was there in 2023 when they were working on their first national security strategy, and it was not a pretty sight. And the outcome was not very inspiring, quite frankly. Britain is out of the EU, so the second largest economy, the quintessentially maritime power, has left, the closest ally to the US, historically speaking. The German economic heft now means that this EU is a much more continental and much more German project, frankly speaking. And if you look at the drive to centralize the new union treaty that's being debated, I'd like to ask from the perspective of smaller states, because this impacts of the security of the flank. Germany saw its Russia policy of 20 years implode spectacularly in 2022. there hasn't been much of a reckoning other than we should have listened to Poland, Sweden, Baltic states, and all of that. Now we're talking about building strong military. A lot of historical and political issues have not been addressed. And this is really a question of, as Heather so rightly put it, what's the purpose? I mean, what is the gestalt of European relations? I assume with NATO in existence and the United States in it, but nobody can prophesize what's going to happen. And so what kind of an entity is it likely to emerge? What voices would smaller states have if you abandon the veto and you move to majority voting and some of the other things that are on the table? And finally, you know, can you really think of any sort of real military structures within the EU? Or is this all, you know, one more exercise and let's create a new institution and let's, you know, have a commissioner for XYZ. But when rubber meets the road, it's really NATO or nothing. So I'm just very curious, and Heather, I'd welcome your comments after the other panelists.
Let's start with Eric.
Sure. On your last point, I mean, my view is obviously the EU has stepped up what it does on defense. It used to not talk about defense at all. It has, to your point, the defense commissioner. It is talking about the need to strengthen the European defense market. I think that's where I see the EU as kind of a regulator. I don't see the EU evolving into a defense player. Notion of a European army is outlandish, right? I think the real action is at NATO and it's at national level. And I think that will continue to be the case. But that's not to say that there's things that the EU can do in a broader space. Military mobility, regulatory issues, you know, that's important, and that will continue to be the case. Your question about Germany, I think, is spot on, and we've talked about that. I think Germany is the question mark. I think Germany, from a small state perspective, or from a Scandinavian perspective, Germany is still viewed very much as kind of a like-minded country. It's kind of Northern European in its outlook. It's global in its outlook. Increasingly supportive of Ukraine. I think increasingly sees Russia as a threat, even though maybe that was not sufficiently articulated in their last national security strategy. I hope it will be in future iterations. I don't get the sense, talking to officials or experts in Berlin, that there's any kind of sympathy towards Russia left, or any notion that they can go back to being reliant on Russian gas and Nord Stream and so forth. I think that ship has sailed. I think Germany is changing. It's moving away from that. But I think Germany still remains rooted, and I think correctly so, in a transatlantic context. It's comfortable operating when the US still leads and when NATO is still around. I think if you take that away from the equation, it would be very different. So I think in that sense, Germany is a link for some of these countries to anchor themselves around as part of a stronger Europe that's still deeply connected to the US and the Transatlantic Alliance.
I just want to add to the discussion on we should put more effort into building the European Union as a strong defense kind of cooperation. I think that after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it has been more clear than before, what NATO is doing and what the EU is doing. And to build up a competing operational structure is not a good idea.
Right.
And 85% of defense spending come from non-EU members in NATO, from Turkey, Britain, Norway, Canada, and United States. So that's definitely not a good idea. But the European Union has been very effective to coordinate assistance to Ukraine and also on implementing sanctions. So I think the vision now is clearer than before. And to give the European Union an operational position, kind of to coordinate forces, is not a very good idea. What do you think as a new NATO member?
No, I completely agree.
Yeah.
You know, I think, Andrew, the jury is still out here. What I think the most successful thing that we can hope for is that in these security mini-laterals that are developing, I would say, around capabilities, which is something maybe to watch, anchoring Germany to that. So the industrial capacity is building into the capability that they need. But as I said, you can hear it in Chancellor Merz's they are so conflicted.
Yeah.
They don't want to lose the United States as that security anchor, but they know it's fragile. And so they're trying to create a European structure, and they're getting caught between those two. And I think what they'll find is they'll end up being unsatisfied with either side unless they try to clear a path. But I guess I'm on the day-to-day, and we should have no criticism, our own defense procurement production lines, but it's going to be even more challenging for Germany. And even doing pooling and sharing, I mean, anyone who watches the FCAS conversation knows that there's going to be a long way to go. But I also see where Norway is buying British Type 26 frigates. If we start creating some commonality, so maybe the capability can create some of those new synergies, and we're anchoring it. I think, again, continuing to watch German forces in Lithuania trying to build those capabilities. As I said, they just have to anchor to they have to anchor to their purpose. And right now, I think they're filling holes, but they're not sure what that purpose is.
But Germany have the money, and I think there's some good examples now of German cooperation with Ukraine on defense innovation and on drones, where you can marry the German industrial capacity and the financing with the Ukrainian know-how and technology. And I think that symbiosis is really, really exciting and what Europe needs very much.
So I'm afraid we'll have to draw this to a close, but before we do that, I wanted to abuse my position as moderator and offer a footnote to Andrew's question. To me, the most useful role that the EU as an institution can play in kind of fostering good strategic outcomes is to do the few things it was set up to do and can do well. And in this space, that means completing the saving and investment union and helping to mobilize this 30 trillion in European savings in a way that can flow across national borders to most productive users, whether it's venture capital, whether it's funding a defense industry worthy of its name. I think that is something that actually is politically feasible, should be done, and it's almost a necessary condition for the EU to be able, for Europe to be able to kind of complete that European pillar of NATO and beef up its defenses. So that's all I'll say on that subject. And unless there are any further thoughts from any of my three panelists, I think we need to wrap it up. And I want to thank Ambassador Whitfeld and Heather Connolly and Eric Bradberg for their contributions. I thought this was a rather pleasant and, for me, enlightening conversation. So thank you so much, and thank you all.
And not very polarized.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's fun. Yeah, it's fun.